The morning light from Kepler-44 to B's twin suns streamed through the massive crystal windows of Stellar Haven Hotel. The lobby sparkled like a jewel box, floors made of polished moonstone and walls that shifted colors based on the emotions of nearby guests. Alien dignitaries from across the galaxy moved through the space with purpose, their exotic forms creating a living rainbow of species. Jake Morrison pushed through the main entrance, carrying a worn leather toolkit that had seen better days. His blue work coveralls were clean but faded, and his work boots made soft, squeaking sounds against the expensive floor. He looked like any other maintenance worker reporting for duty, which was exactly what he wanted, at 42 years old. Jake had learned that you could tell a lot about a business by walking through it unnoticed. The real problems always showed themselves when nobody thought the boss was watching. Today, he was investigating reports of communication system failures that could affect the entire space station's emergency protocols. The reception desk stood at the center of the lobby like a monument to luxury. It was carved from a single piece of Vethrin crystal that hummed with soft energy. Behind it stood Zixthera, a being that looked like she was made of living glass. Her crystalline body caught the light and threw rainbow patterns across the walls. She was nearly 7 feet tall, with features that seemed both beautiful and cold at the same time. Zixthera belonged to the Vethrin hegemony, a race that had mastered faster than light travel when humans were still learning to make fire. Her people considered themselves the most advanced civilization in the galaxy, and they never let anyone forget it. The crystal formations on her forehead marked her as nobility, someone born to rule over lesser beings. Jake approached the desk with his toolkit, trying to look tired and a little nervous. It wasn't hard to act the part. After years of building his business empire, he sometimes missed the simple days when his biggest worry was whether a circuit board would work properly. "Excuse me," Jake said in a humble voice. "I'm here about the communication array problem. Maintenance called about some interference issues." Zixthera didn't look up from her holographic display. Her fingers, long and sharp like icicles, danced over controls that managed bookings for guests from hundreds of different worlds. When she finally acknowledged Jake's presence, her expression showed the kind of boredom reserved for dealing with insects. "Another human," she said, her voice like wind chimes made of broken glass. "I suppose they sent you because the real technicians are busy with important work." Jake felt his jaw tighten, but kept his expression neutral. "Yes, ma'am. I just need to check the main communication hub. Should only take a few minutes." Zixthera finally looked at him directly, her crystal eyes reflecting his image in dozens of tiny fragments. "Minutes? You think you can understand Vethrin? Quantum communication technology in minutes? Your species barely understands fire." A group of Corvani merchants near the elevator turned to watch the exchange. The Corvani looked like giant beetles made of polished metal, and their compound eyes missed nothing. Jake could feel their attention like heat on his back. "I have my work orders right here," Jake said, reaching for his tablet. Building maintenance requested a full diagnostic of the system. "Work orders." Ixeta laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. "Of course. You need written instructions. I doubt you could find your way to the bathroom without a map." She gestured dismissively toward the area behind her desk. "The access panel is there. Try not to break anything that costs more than your annual salary." Jake moved around the desk, noting how other aliens in the lobby had started to pay attention. Word traveled fast in confined spaces, like space stations, and everyone was always looking for entertainment. He knelt beside a panel that looked like it belonged in a starship rather than a hotel. The communication array was a masterpiece of engineering that connected the hotel to 17 different planets simultaneously. It handled everything from room service orders to emergency evacuation procedures. If it failed completely, the entire station could be cut off from the outside galaxy. Jake opened his toolkit and pulled out instruments that looked simple, but were actually worth more than most people's homes. He had designed some of them himself, back when he was still working with his hands instead of managing spreadsheets and board meetings. "What?" "Look at him," Zixthera said loudly enough for half the lobby to hear. "What?" Poking at technology he couldn't build in 1,000 years. Humans think they can fix anything with primitive tools and stubbornness. A Selenian diplomat, tall and graceful with skin like polished silver, glided over to the desk. "Is there a problem with the communications, Zixthera?" "No real problem, Ambassador Kale. Just the usual issue of hiring inferior species for technical work. The hotel management has been cutting costs lately." Voice carried clearly across the marble floors. "They bring in humans to work on systems they barely understand. It's embarrassing, really." Jake continued his work, running diagnostics through his handheld scanner. The problem was more complex than the initial reports had suggested. Someone had been trying to hack into the hotel's main database through the communication system. Intrusion attempts were subtle, but dangerous. Of course, what can you expect from a species that only left their home planet a few decades ago? Zixthera continued her commentary. They stumbled into space travel by accident, and now they think they belong among civilized races. The Corvani merchants approached the desk, their metal feet clicking against the floor like typewriter keys. "The human seems to know what he's doing," one of them said in their buzzing language. "Appearances can be deceiving," Zixthera replied. "Smoothly. Humans are very good at pretending to understand things beyond their capability. It's how they've survived this long." Jake isolated the security breach and began tracing its source. The hackers were good, but they had made one crucial mistake. They had assumed the hotel's security was standard commercial grade. Jake had personally designed the system using military specifications that most people didn't even know existed. "You know what I find most amusing?" Zixthera addressed the growing crowd of onlookers. "Humans actually believe they contribute something valuable to galactic civilization. They have no unique technology, no artistic achievements worth mentioning, and no philosophical insights that weren't discovered by other species millennia ago. A small group of Zephyrian traders, beings that looked like walking flowers, gathered. Near the desk, their petals shifted colors as they listened, indicating their emotional state. Jake could see they were uncomfortable with Zixthera's words, but none of them spoke up. "Useful for manual labor, I suppose," Zixthera continued. "And they do breed quickly, which makes them good for dangerous jobs that real people shouldn't risk." Jake found the source of the hack attempt. It was coming from a ship in the station's lower docking bay. It's probably pirates testing the hotel's defenses before attempting a robbery. He began implementing countermeasures while making mental notes about improving the system's security protocols. "Funniest part is how seriously they take themselves," Zixthera said, warming to her subject. "They actually think they deserve equal treatment in galactic affairs. As if a species that learned agriculture last week should have the same voice as civilizations that have been exploring space for millions of years." Jake's hands moved steadily over his instruments, but his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about the first time he had stayed in a hotel as a child. How amazed he had been by the clean sheets and the little soaps wrapped in paper. He remembered promising himself that someday he would build places where everyone could feel that sense of wonder and comfort. "I suppose we should be grateful they're willing to do the jobs nobody else wants," Zixthera concluded. "Someone has to clean the waste disposal systems and repair the basic machinery. At least they're good at taking orders." The communication array hummed back to full power, its quantum processors once again operating at peak efficiency. Jake had not only fixed the original problem, but had also installed new security measures that would prevent future intrusion attempts. The work had taken him exactly 23 minutes. He packed his tools carefully, each instrument returning to its designated spot in the worn leather case. Around him, the lobby had returned to its normal rhythm of interstellar business and diplomacy. But Jake could feel the weight of Zixthera's words hanging in the air like smoke from a fire that wouldn't quite go out. Jake stood up slowly, brushing dust off his knees. The communication array was working perfectly now, but he still needed to run a full system check to make sure all the security patches had taken hold. He pulled out a small device that looked like an old-fashioned radio but was actually a quantum field analyzer worth more than most starships. Zixthera watched him with growing irritation. She had expected the human to fumble around for hours, maybe even break something that would prove her point about their incompetence. Instead, he had worked with steady confidence, his hands moving over the controls like he had designed them himself. "What is that primitive device supposed to do?" she asked loudly, making sure the aliens gathered nearby could hear every word. "Please tell me you're not planning to use Stone Age technology on our advanced systems." Jake didn't look up from his scanner, just running some final diagnostics. "Want to make sure everything's working properly." "Diagnostics?" Zixthera's laugh tinkled like breaking ice. "I mean, you're guessing and hoping for the best." Typical human approach to problem solving. The Corvani merchants exchanged glances, their metal faces impossible to read. One of them stepped closer to the desk. "The communication system seems to be functioning normally now," he said in his buzzing voice. "Of course it is," Zixthera replied smoothly. "The system has automatic repair protocols. It would have fixed itself eventually. The human just happened to be here when it finished its self-diagnostic cycle." Jake's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level.
"Actually,
"Someone was trying to hack into your main database through the communication portal. I've closed that security hole and installed some additional protection." Zixthera's crystal eyes flashed with anger. "Security hole? Are you suggesting that Vethran technology has flaws? Our systems are vulnerable to attack?" "All systems have vulnerabilities," Jake said quietly. "The important thing is finding them before the bad guys do." "Bad guys?" Zixthera's voice rose an octave. "Listen to him talk, like a child playing with toys he doesn't understand." She turned to address the growing crowd of onlookers. "This is exactly the problem with hiring humans for technical positions. They see conspiracies everywhere because they don't understand how real technology works." Ambassador Kale, the silver-skinned Selenian diplomat, approached the desk with fluid grace. Her people valued harmony above all else, and Jake could see she was uncomfortable with the confrontation. "Perhaps we should allow the technician to complete his work in peace," she suggested gently. "Peace?" Zixthera's voice dripped with disdain. "Ambassador, with respect, you're too kind to these creatures. Humans interpret kindness as weakness. They need firm guidance to keep them focused on their simple tasks." Jake's scanner beeped softly, indicating that all systems were now operating at full capacity. The security breach had been completely sealed, and the new protocols he had installed would automatically detect and prevent similar attacks in the future. He made a few notes on his tablet, documenting the work for his maintenance records. "Look at him scribbling on that primitive device," Zixthera continued her commentary. "Probably can't even spell the words he's writing. Human education is notoriously inadequate." A group of Altarian traders, tall beings with blue skin and elegant features, had stopped to watch the spectacle. Their leader, a female with intricate tattoos covering her arms, looked troubled. "The human seems competent enough," she said, in accented standard Galactic. "Competent." Zixthera laughed again. "My dear Valandra, you're confusing basic motor skills with actual intelligence. And a trained monkey could follow written instructions." Just as well. Jake felt heat rising in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. He had learned long ago that the best way to deal with bullies was to let them reveal their true character while maintaining his own dignity. He began packing his tools, each one going into its designated spot in the worn leather case.
"The truth
"Is," Zixthera said, her voice carrying clearly across the marble lobby. "Humans only achieve space travel by stealing technology from their betters. They have no original ideas, no creative spark, no ability to innovate beyond copying what others have already invented." The Zephyrian traders, the flower-like beings near the elevator, rustled their petals in what Jake recognized as distress. Their species valued truth and fairness above most things, and Zixthera's words clearly bothered them. "They're like children who found their parents' tools," Zixthera continued, warming to her subject. "Dangerous children who might hurt themselves or others because they don't understand what they're playing with." Jake closed his toolkit and stood up. He could walk away now. His job was done, and there was nothing to be gained by continuing to listen to this abuse. But something in Zixthera's tone suggested she wasn't finished with her performance. "The worst part is their arrogance," she said, her crystal fingers dancing over her control panel as she pretended to work. "They actually believe they deserve equal treatment in galactic affairs. Can you imagine? A species that discovered fire last week demanding A seat at the table with civilizations that have been exploring the cosmos for millions of years. Ambassador Kale shifted uncomfortably. Perhaps we should focus on more positive topics, she suggested diplomatically. I'm just stating facts, Ambassador, Zixthera replied. Facts that everyone knows, but nobody wants to say out loud. Humans are useful for manual labor and dangerous jobs that real people shouldn't risk. That's their place in the galactic order. Jake felt the weight of dozens of alien eyes on him. Some looked uncomfortable with Zixthera's words, while others nodded in agreement. He had experienced prejudice before, but never quite so publicly or with such calculated cruelty. They breed quickly, I'll give them that, Zixthera continued, which makes them perfect for colonizing hostile worlds or working in radiation zones. When they die, there are always more to replace them. The Altarian leader Valandra stepped forward. That seems unnecessarily harsh, she said quietly. Harsh? Zixthera's voice rose. I'm being generous. Do you know what humans were doing while my people were building quantum computers? They were hitting rocks with sticks and painting on cave walls, and we're supposed to treat them as equals? Jake picked up his toolkit, testing its weight in. His hand. The leather was smooth from years of use, and he could feel the familiar shape of each tool through the worn material. He thought about all the hotels he had built, all the jobs he had created, all the problems he had solved with these same hands. The galaxy would be better off if humans stayed on their little blue planet, Zixthera declared. They contribute nothing of value to interstellar civilization. No art, no science, no philosophy worth mentioning. They're consumers, not creators. A new voice cut through the lobby's ambient noise. That's quite enough. Ambassador Veltar of the Selenian Commerce Guild emerged from the elevator, his tall frame draped in robes that marked his high rank. He was one of the most powerful beings in this sector of space, and his word carried weight across dozens of star systems. Zixthera immediately straightened, her crystal features arranging themselves into a mask of respect. Ambassador Veltar. What an honor. I was just explaining to our guest about the challenges of working with primitive species. I heard, Veltar said coldly, silver eyes fixed on Jake, taking in the work coveralls and the toolkit. And you are? Cht, Morrison. Jake replied simply, maintenance technician. Zixthera saw an opportunity to demonstrate her point. As you can see, Ambassador, the hotel has been forced to hire humans for technical work. I'm sure someone of your stature would prefer to stay at an establishment that maintains higher standards. Veltar's expression didn't change, but Jake could see calculation in his ancient eyes. The Selenian species had been traders for millennia, and they knew the value of information. They also knew the danger of making assumptions based on appearances. Higher standards, Veltar repeated slowly. I see. Jake shouldered his toolkit and headed toward the lobby exit. He had work to do in other parts of the hotel, and standing here listening to more abuse wouldn't accomplish anything. But as he walked away, he could hear Zixthera's voice continuing her lecture about human inferiority to the assembled crowd of alien dignitaries. The problem with humans, she said, is that they don't know their place. Jake had only made it halfway across the lobby when Zixthera's voice cut through the air like a blade. Wait just a moment, human. He stopped and turned around slowly. The crystalline receptionist had left her post and was walking toward him. With the confident stride of someone who believed they held all the power in the room, behind her, the crowd of alien dignitaries watched with the fascination of people observing a traffic accident. I want to test something, Zixthera announced loudly. Since you claim to understand our advanced technology, perhaps you can answer a few simple questions. Jake set down his toolkit and faced her. I have other work to do, ma'am. This will only take a moment, she said with a smile that looked like cracked ice, unless of course you're afraid to demonstrate your knowledge in front of witnesses. Ambassador Veltar moved closer, his silver robes rustling against the marble floor. The other aliens formed a loose circle around them, creating an impromptu arena. Jake could feel the weight of their attention like heat from a furnace. Fine, Jake said quietly. What do you want to know? Zixthera's crystal eyes gleamed with malicious joy. Let's start with something basic. Can you explain how a quantum field generator maintains stability across multiple dimensional phases? The question was designed to confuse and humiliate. Quantum field generators were among the most complex pieces of technology in known space, requiring years of study to fully understand. Most technicians could operate them without truly comprehending the physics involved. A quantum field generator uses paired particle entanglement to create stable energy fields that exist partially outside normal spacetime. Jake replied without hesitation. The dimensional phases are maintained through controlled quantum decoherence, monitored by probability wave sensors that adjust field strength in real time. Zixthera's confident expression faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly. Lucky guess. Any technician who works with the equipment learns to repeat the manual descriptions. The real challenge, Jake continued, is preventing cascade failures. When multiple generators operate in proximity, you need to offset the quantum frequencies by exactly 7.3 terahertz intervals, or the entangled particles start interfering with each other. Several aliens in the crowd exchanged glances. The Corvani merchants began buzzing among themselves in their native language. Jake's answer had gone far beyond basic technical knowledge. Memorized responses, Zixthera said, but her voice lacked its earlier confidence. Let's try something more complex. How do hyperspatial communication protocols maintain message integrity across galactic distances? Jake looked around at the watching faces. Some showed curiosity, others skepticism. A few seemed uncomfortable with the entire situation. Hyperspatial communication uses quantum entanglement networks anchored to subspace beacons. The message is encoded into quantum states and transmitted through folded spacetime. Integrity is maintained by triple redundant error correction algorithms and temporal synchronization markers. The biggest problem, he added, is dealing with gravitational interference from black holes and neutron stars. You have to constantly recalibrate the beacon networks to account for stellar drift and relativistic effects. Ambassador Veltar stepped forward. That's a remarkably detailed explanation for a maintenance technician. I read a lot, Jake said. Simply, Zixthera's crystal features were now showing cracks of frustration. Reading and understanding are different things. Anyone can memorize technical manuals. She paused, searching for a more difficult question. What about temporal mechanics? How do you prevent paradox formation in time-dilated communication systems? Jake was quiet for a moment, not because he didn't know the answer, but because he was starting to lose patience with the entire performance. You use causal loop buffers and temporal isolation chambers. The communication system exists in a localized time bubble that prevents information from affecting its own past. It's basic paradox prevention. Basic. Zixthera's voice cracked. Like breaking glass. You call temporal mechanics basic? The math is complex, but the concept is straightforward, Jake replied. Most species figure it out within a few decades of developing faster than light travel. The assembled aliens fell. Silent. Jake's casual dismissal of one of the most challenging aspects of advanced physics was either the mark of a genius or someone who had completely lost touch with reality. Zixthera realized her technical questioning had backfired, instead of exposing Jake's ignorance. She had somehow allowed him to demonstrate knowledge that impressed even the most sophisticated aliens present. She needed to change tactics. Impressive memorization, she said, her voice dripping with false praise. But technical knowledge means nothing without understanding. Any primitive creature can repeat words without comprehending their meaning. She raised her voice to address the entire lobby. This is exactly what I was talking about earlier. Humans think that memorizing facts makes them intelligent. They don't understand the deeper principles behind the technology they pretend to master. Felt something snap inside his chest. He had endured the insults to his species, the mockery of his appearance, and the deliberate humiliation in front of important guests. But now she was attacking the very foundation of human achievement. Dismissing millennia of struggle and innovation as mere mimicry. You want to talk about understanding? Jake asked, his voice still calm but carrying a new edge that made several aliens step back. Let's talk about the hotel's environmental systems. Do you know why the atmospheric processors are calibrated? To maintain exactly 21.7% oxygen instead of the standard 20%? Zixthera blinked in confusion. That's not important. It's just a technical specification. It's calibrated that way because we have Matherian guests who need slightly higher oxygen levels to prevent respiratory distress, Jake explained. The 1.7% increase is precisely calculated to help them breathe comfortably without affecting the other species present. He gestured toward the environmental controls near the ceiling. The temperature is maintained at 22.4 degrees Celsius, which is exactly between the comfort zones of Vethran and Altarian physiology. The humidity is kept at 34% because anything higher makes the Zephyrian traders uncomfortable, and anything lower irritates Selenian skin. Ambassador Veltar was now paying very close attention. You seem to know a great deal about the hotel's operations. I know that every light fixture in this lobby is positioned to avoid casting shadows on the Corvani merchants, so their compound eyes are sensitive to rapid light changes, Jake continued. I know that the marble floor is treated with a special polymer that prevents the Chinari delegates from slipping, because their feet secrete a natural oil that reacts badly with most stone surfaces. The crowd of aliens looked around the lobby with new eyes, suddenly aware of dozens of subtle accommodations they had never noticed before. The quantum field generators aren't just maintaining the communication array, Jake said, his voice growing stronger. They're also powering the gravity adjusters that let the low-gravity species walk comfortably alongside the high-gravity ones. The hyperspatial communication system doesn't just connect us to other planets. It monitors 17 different emergency frequencies so we can respond instantly if any guest needs help. Zixthera opened her mouth to interrupt, but Jake wasn't finished. You want to know what humans contribute to galactic civilization? He asked, his eyes meeting hers directly. We contribute the idea that every being deserves respect and comfort, regardless of their species or origin. We contribute the belief that intelligence comes in many forms, and that wisdom is more valuable than raw knowledge. He picked up his toolkit, the leather handle smooth and familiar in his grip. We contribute the understanding that true strength comes from building others up, not tearing them down. Earth is not a backwater world, Jake said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent lobby. It's a planet that taught us to value diversity, to find strength in differences, and to judge others by their actions rather than their appearance. He looked around at the assembled aliens, seeing uncertainty in faces that had earlier shown agreement with Zixthera's prejudices. And most importantly, Jake concluded, we contribute the revolutionary idea that everyone deserves a chance to prove their worth regardless of what others think they know about them. The lobby remained completely silent for several heartbeats. Then, slowly, Ambassador Veltar began to clap. The sound echoed off the crystal walls like thunder. The sound of Ambassador Veltar's applause echoed through the crystal lobby like thunder rolling across mountains. One by one, other aliens joined in, their various appendages, creating a symphony of approval that filled the vast space. Eltarian traders clapped with their four-fingered hands, while the Zephyrian flower beings rustled their petals in their version of appreciation. Zixthera stood frozen in the center of it all, her crystal face reflecting the lights around her like a broken mirror. She had expected to humiliate the human technician, and instead had witnessed something that made her deeply uncomfortable. The primitive creature had spoken with more wisdom and dignity than most of the so-called civilized beings she dealt with. Daily Jake felt the weight of all those watching eyes. Part of him wanted to slip away quietly, to return to his work, and let the moment pass. But another part recognized that something important had happened here, something that went beyond one alien's prejudice or one human's response to it. The applause was dying down when the lobby's main elevator chimed softly. The doors slid open. With a whisper of advanced technology, and Lisa Carter stepped out. Shh. She was a woman in her early 40s, with short brown hair, and the kind of professional appearance that spoke of competence and authority. Her business suit was perfectly tailored, and she moved with the confident stride of someone used to managing complex situations. Lisa's eyes swept the lobby, taking in the unusual gathering of aliens around the reception desk. Her gaze found Jake standing in the center of the group, still holding his worn leather toolkit, and her face went pale. "Hey, Mr. Morrison," she called out, her voice carrying a note of panic that made every alien in the lobby turn to look at her. "Sir, I am so terribly sorry.
Hey.
I had no idea you were down here." She hurried across the marble floor, her heels clicking like a metronome, counting down to disaster. "I've been looking everywhere for you. When I heard there was some kind of situation in the lobby, I came as fast as I could." Zixthera looked confused, her crystal features shifting as she tried to process what she was hearing. "Mr. Morrison? This is just a maintenance technician." Lisa stopped beside Jake, slightly out of breath from her rush through the hotel's corridors. She was one of the few people who knew Jake's habit of personally inspecting every aspect of his properties, often in disguise. She had been frantically searching for him after hearing reports from other staff members about the confrontation. At the reception desk, "Zixthera," Lisa said, her voice tight with barely controlled fear. "Please tell me you haven't been treating our guests poorly." "Guests?" Zixthera's voice cracked like ice under pressure. "What guests?" "This is a human. Technician. I was simply explaining to the distinguished aliens present about the challenges of working with primitive species." Lisa's face went from pale to white as paper. She looked around at the assembled crowd of alien dignitaries, many of whom were now watching the scene with intense curiosity. Ambassador Veltar stood nearby, his silver eyes missing nothing. "Zixthera," Lisa said slowly, as if speaking to someone who might not understand the words, "this is Jake Morrison. He's the owner of Stellar Haven Hotel and the entire Morrison Hospitality Consortium." The words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. For a moment, nobody moved or spoke. The only sound was the soft hum of the hotel's environmental systems, maintaining perfect comfort for dozens of different species. Then Zixthera began to tremble. Jake Morrison wasn't just wealthy or influential. He was one of the most powerful humans in this entire sector of space. His consortium owned 17 major hotels across 12 different star systems. His business empire employed over 50,000 beings of various species, and his influence reached into trade agreements, diplomatic negotiations, and interstellar commerce. More importantly, Jake Morrison was famous throughout the galaxy as a businessman who had started with nothing and built his empire through innovation, his hard work, and treating everyone with respect, regardless of their species or background. His hotels were known for their revolutionary approach to multi-species hospitality, creating environments where any being could feel comfortable and welcome. "The owner," Zixthera whispered, her crystal voice barely audible. "The owner of the hotel is the owner of this hotel." "Yes," Lisa confirmed. "And 16 others. And the shipping companies that supply them, and the construction firms that built them." Her voice was getting higher with each word. "Ain't you been insulting him for the past hour?" The alien dignitaries in the lobby began to murmur among themselves. The Corvani merchants were buzzing with excitement, their metal bodies clicking as they processed this information. The implications were staggering. They had just witnessed one of the galaxy's most successful businessmen being publicly humiliated by his own employee. Ambassador Veltar stepped forward, his ancient eyes fixed on Jake with new understanding. "Mr. Morrison," he said formally, "I had heard you were known for hands-on management, but I never expected to encounter you working on the equipment personally." Jake finally spoke, his voice calm despite everything that had happened. "I make it a point to understand every aspect of my business, Ambassador, from the quantum generators in the basement to the communication arrays behind the reception desk. You can't manage what you don't understand." "But why dress as a technician?" asked Valandra, the Altarian trade leader. "Why not announce yourself?" "Because the real problems only show themselves when people think nobody important is watching," Jake replied. "You learn more about your business by walking through it unnoticed than you ever will from reports and meetings." Zixthera was still trembling, her crystal body making tiny chiming sounds as the vibrations passed through her structure. She had spent the last hour systematically destroying her own career, insulting not just a guest, but the most powerful guest the hotel had ever hosted. "Mr. Morrison," she whispered, "I didn't know. I had no idea who you were." "Would it have mattered?" Jake asked quietly. "If I really had been just a technician, would that have made your behavior acceptable?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Around the lobby, aliens who had nodded in agreement with Zixthera's earlier statements now looked uncomfortable. They were being forced to confront their own prejudices, their own assumptions about human capabilities and worth. I was trying to maintain standards, Zixthera said weakly. My people believe in proper hierarchy, in knowing one's place. And what's my place? Jake asked. What's the place of the species that built this hotel, that designed the systems you were so sure I couldn't understand, that created an environment where dozens of different species can live and work together in harmony? Lisa stepped closer to Jake, her face still pale with shock. I take full responsibility for this situation. I should have briefed all staff. About your inspection schedule. No, Jake said firmly. This isn't about schedules or briefings. This is about how we treat people when we think no one important is watching. He looked around at the assembled aliens, his eyes meeting each of theirs in turn. Every species represented in this room has achieved great things. The Vethrans mastered quantum physics. Selenians built the first stable trade networks. The Corvani developed faster-than-light communication. But none of those achievements would mean anything if we used them to justify treating others with cruelty or contempt, Jake continued. Technology without wisdom is just expensive ways to make the same old mistakes. Zixthera's crystal form was now showing visible cracks, stress fractures that appeared when her species experienced extreme emotional trauma. She knew her career was over. No hotel in the galaxy would hire someone who had publicly humiliated Jake Morrison.
What happens
now? She asked, her voice like breaking glass. Jake looked at her for a long moment, considering. The entire lobby waited for his response, knowing that his next words would determine not just Zixthera's fate, but would send a message throughout the galaxy about how Jake Morrison dealt with those who wronged him. Jake said quietly, "We find out what kind of person you really are." The silence in the lobby stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Zixthera stood frozen in the center of the circle, her crystal body reflecting the lights around her in fractured patterns. The stress cracks in her face had spread, creating a web of lines that made her look ancient and fragile. Jake walked slowly back to the communication panel, his worn toolkit still in his hand. The leather case had seen thousands of repairs, countless hours of work across dozens of star systems. He knelt down and pulled out one final diagnostic tool, a small device that most people would mistake for a simple screwdriver. The security breach I found earlier wasn't random, he said without looking up. Someone was specifically targeting our guest registry, trying to access personal information about the aliens staying here. Held up the device, which was now displaying a stream of data. The attack came from a ship in Docking Bay 7. Pirates, probably planning to kidnap high-value guests or steal sensitive trade information. Ambassador Veltar moved closer, his silver robes rustling. Are you saying we were all in danger? Not anymore, Jake replied, standing up and dusting off his knees. The new security protocols I installed will prevent any similar attacks. But it makes you think about what really matters, doesn't it? Turned to face Zixthera, who was still, trembling like a tuning fork. While you were worried about my species and my appearance, actual criminals were trying to hurt the guests you're supposed to protect. The alien dignitaries exchanged uncomfortable glances, buzzed among themselves, processing the implications. The Zephyrian traders rustled their petals in distress, realizing how close they had come to danger while being distracted by the confrontation. I'm sorry, Zix, Thera whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't know about the security threat. I was so focused on proving that humans are inferior, Jake finished for her. On demonstrating your own superiority to an audience of important guests, Lisa Carter stepped forward, her professional training taking over despite her shock. Mr. Morrison, what are your instructions regarding Zixthera's employment? Jake looked around the lobby at all the watching faces. Some showed curiosity, others showed judgment. A few seemed to be waiting for him to demonstrate the kind of ruthless power that built business empires. Zixthera, Jake said quietly, your contract with this hotel is terminated, effective immediately. The crystalline being's face cracked. Further, and a sound like breaking wind chimes escaped her throat. She had expected this, but hearing the words still hit her like a physical blow. Her career in hospitality was over. Word would spread throughout the galaxy within hours. Security will escort you to collect your belongings, Jake continued. Two hotel security guards, a human and a Cheneri, appeared from their posts near the elevator. They moved with professional efficiency, but their faces showed no satisfaction. In Zixthora's downfall, Jake ran a good business, and that meant treating even dismissed employees with basic dignity. But then Jake raised his hand, stopping the security team in their tracks. However, he said, and the single word carried enough. Wait to make everyone in the lobby lean forward. I'm going to make you an offer. Zixera looked up through her cracked features, confusion replacing despair. You can leave now with a basic termination package, Jake explained. Or you can spend the next week working alongside our human maintenance staff, doing the same jobs you just called beneath your dignity. The lobby erupted in shocked murmurs. Even by human standards, the offer was extraordinary. By galactic standards, it was unprecedented. No business leader had ever offered such mercy to someone who had caused such public humiliation. If you complete that week, Jake continued, and if you receive good evaluations from the staff you've insulted, I'll write you a recommendation for employment elsewhere. Ambassador Veltar stepped forward, his ancient eyes wide with amazement. Mr. Morrison, such generosity is ... unusual. Is it? Jake asked. Where I come from, we believe that. People can change if they're given the chance to learn. Zixera made a mistake based on ignorance and prejudice. The question is whether she's willing to correct that ignorance. He turned back to the trembling alien. The choice is yours. You can walk away now and find work somewhere else, if anyone will hire you after this, or you can stay and learn what humans are really like. Askstara stared at him for a long moment. Her crystal eyes, fractured as they were, still showed intelligence. She was calculating odds, weighing options, trying to understand why her victim was offering her salvation instead of revenge. Why? She whispered. After everything I said, everything I did to humiliate you, why would you help me? Jake smiled. For the first time since entering the lobby, it was a tired smile, but genuine. Because that's what humans do. We lift each other up, even when we have every reason not to. I don't understand, Zixthera said. You will, Jake replied. If you stay. The crystalline being looked around the lobby at all the watching faces. Some of the aliens were nodding in approval, recognizing the wisdom in Jake's offer. Others looked skeptical, probably thinking that mercy was a sign of weakness. I'll stay, Zixthera said quietly. I'll work with your maintenance staff. Jake nodded to Lisa, who made a note on her tablet. Lisa will arrange your schedule. You'll report to Chief Engineer Martinez in the morning. By the way, but I think you'll find he knows what he's doing. Over the following week, something remarkable happened. Zixthera, who had never performed manual labor in her privileged life, found herself crawling through maintenance tunnels with human technicians who had every reason to treat her badly. Instead, they showed her kindness she had never experienced from her own supposedly superior people. Tom Rodriguez, a young human engineer, patiently taught her how to calibrate environmental controls without once mentioning her previous behavior. Maria Santos, a systems specialist, shared her lunch when Zixthera forgot to bring food. Pete Williams, an old-timer who had worked for Jake since the early days, told her stories about building the first Morrison hotel with nothing but determination and borrowed tools. Jake watched from his office as Zixthera learned that the primitive humans she had mocked possessed incredible ingenuity, compassion, and work ethic. They'd solved problems with creativity when they lacked resources. They'd helped each other without being asked. They treated her with respect, despite having every reason for revenge. On the final day of her probation, Zixthera sat in Jake's office. The stress cracks in her crystal face had healed, and her eyes were clearer than they had been in years. I owe you an apology, she said, not just for the insults, but for my ignorance. I thought I understood what strength was. Thought it meant being better than others, proving your superiority. And now? Jake asked. Now I know that real strength means helping others become better, she replied. Your people taught me that. They showed me what civilization really looks like. Handed her an envelope. Inside was a letter of recommendation that would open doors throughout the galaxy. But more than that, it was a testament to the human belief that anyone could change, anyone could grow, anyone could become better than they were. "There's one condition," Jake said as she prepared to leave. "Wherever you go, whatever you do, remember what you learned here. And maybe, when you meet someone who needs a second chance, you'll give them the same gift you received." Zixthera left Stellar Haven Hotel that day, but the story of what happened there spread throughout the galaxy like wildfire. It became known as the Morrison Incident, a tale told in trade stations and diplomatic halls across dozens of star systems. Aliens who had dismissed humans as primitive began to reconsider their prejudices. The species that had seemed weak because of their compassion was revealed to be strong in ways that mattered more than weapons or technology. Jake turned to his routine of inspecting his properties in disguise, but now he noticed something different. Alien staff members treated human workers with new respect. Species that had barely tolerated each other began working together. The galaxy itself seemed a little kinder, a little more willing to judge by character rather than appearance. And in his office, Jake kept a small crystal sculpture that Zixthera had left as a gift. It caught the light from Kepler-4 for 2Bs, twin suns, and threw rainbow patterns across the walls. A reminder that even the hardest hearts could learn to shine.